Hello, everyone. Sorry about that little technical issue in the beginning there. I'm not really sure why my video bitrate was low, but hopefully you guys can see and hear me now. Now it says excellent condition. I guess this is what happens when you do things live. So welcome to another episode of BIM After Dark Live. Thank you for joining me today. I'm super excited. I got a great guest talking about occupancy, load calculations, and code stuff, and Revit. And I'm sure some of you guys are probably geeking out on this and super pumped. Some of you may be like, I want to check it out because it's cool, but I hate codes. I understand completely. But before we introduce my guest, Dana, I did want to thank you guys for joining. If you're new to this show, this is a weekly live episode or stream, I should say, where we talk about Revit, BIM, and any really related software and technologies. And this is episode 36. 36 now. Wow. So episode 36. If you are interested in seeing the previous 35 episodes, head over to live.bimafterdark.com. And yeah, thank you for joining. Also, make sure you subscribe here on the YouTube channel. I've only got a few more to hit 40,000. That'd be so cool if we hit 40,000 by the end of the year. Before we jump into content, I did want to take a minute to thank our sponsor and roll a quick video for them. Well, there you have it. So BIMbox USA, that is the sponsor of this show. I want to thank you, BIMbox, for sponsoring. For those of you who don't know what BIMbox is, they are a computer manufacturing company who specialize in creating laptops and desktops specifically for us. By us, I mean architects, engineers, contractors working within the space, especially using Revit. I've been using their PCs for over 6 months now, the desktop and the laptop, and they're phenomenal. Actually, hopefully you don't hear it, but I do have one rendering in the background, and it's getting a little loud because it's rendering a pretty long video scene, but it's doing an awesome job. So the other thing to mention about BIMbox, other than the fact that their PCs are awesome looking and they perform incredibly well when it comes to utilizing Revit, is that they are offering a huge sale for the end of this year. So right now, if you reach out to sales at BIMbox USA or bimbox.bimafterdark.com, and you reach out and you buy a new desktop or laptop, you will be receiving, I believe it's $800 off the Striker 2, which is the Revit desktop, $150 off any laptop, and then I think it's $1,400. I should probably check before I say that. $1,400 off their Osprey desktop, which has been designed for laser scanning, and those of you using desktops to process laser scanning. So reach out to them. Buck is an amazing dude, great sales team, 3-year warranty, and they ship within 10 to 14 days. So thank you, BIMbox, for sponsoring this episode. Remember, guys, this is a live show, so feel free to chat. I will be checking the chat out throughout this entire conversation, and I want to interact with you, and so does my guest. So without further ado, let me introduce Dana. Dana, how you doing? Oh, I think I muted you. Sorry. There we go. Dana said, I'm doing awesome. How are you? I'm great. And it's Dana De Filippi. I want to make sure I pronounce it right. De Filippi.
Dana De Filippi. Very Americanized.
Right. Very Americanized. Well, thank you for joining me. For those of you who may think Dana looks familiar, it is because she is the co-host of the BIM Thoughts Podcast and was also on this show with Bill and Carl. When was it? 3 weeks ago now? I don't even know. 3 weeks before
during
Thanksgiving,
AU,
I believe, right?
Right, the week of AU.
Yeah, and so we had a nice little casual conversation. And during that conversation, I think is when you mentioned a class that you gave at AU, and it was about occupancy load. And so we chatted. I talked. You showed me some of the class content, and I thought that'd be a great topic to rediscover here on the show. So thank you for taking the reins on that and being up for it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I love every opportunity I can get to talk about Dynamo and occupancy. So hopefully we have lots of questions from the audience.
Awesome. I just want to check real quick. It says Rick saying that the video is loud and I'm really quiet. Sorry about that, Rick. The video playback for the BIMbox thing, I may have the volume up a little high. So sorry, guys, if I blew out your ears. So Dana, thanks again for joining. Maybe before we jump into the actual content, give everyone a little background on yourself and and how you got to creating this process of occupancy load calculation in Revit.
Okay, yeah, I'm sure a lot like many of my fellow BIM people, I have a very interesting path. I actually started off at Virginia Tech in interior design with a minor in industrial design. Graduated in the recession. I was really lucky to get a job with HSMM, which was acquired by AECOM down in Roanoke, Virginia, and they were really wonderful and put me through Revit training as an intern.
Wait, a company acquired by AECOM? Get out of here.
Get out of here, right?
Shocker.
That doesn't happen. And I was
funny.
actually there during the acquisition, so that was pretty interesting as well.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Yes. So when I got back to Virginia Tech for my senior year, my program chair was like, "Oh my gosh, they taught you Revit. Teach it to everybody." And so I was like, I guess I can try, so I'm fumbling and trying to teach everybody. And I became the Revit chick in college. Sorry, my dog is under my desk.
Oh, that's okay. That's perfect. I hope he barks. I love hearing dogs bark on camera.
Okay. He'll probably be on camera. He's pretty big. But yeah, so I essentially couldn't get any work done in studio. I was the chick always getting all of the Revit questions. Why isn't my ceiling showing up? All of the things, right? So in that, you want to learn something, you teach it, right? So I really did become pretty well versed in Revit during that kind of endeavor. Was really lucky during the recession to get an internship at HOK in Washington, DC, and was in their interior design department and really kind of embraced the Revit side of things. Trayvon Price in the HOK DC office is really fantastic, and I was able to become really good friends with him still to this day. And he kind of took me under his wing. So from that point on, I was, just kind of in the BIM group, if you will. Started doing some consulting through Microdesk, going to a lot of different architecture firms, which was really awesome. I got to see a lot of different Revit templates, a lot of different problems people were doing. And eventually took a firm with a job with a small firm in Washington, DC, very close to HOK's office called Shalom Baranis. We only did work in DC. It was really wonderful. And this is actually where I developed that workflow. Unfortunately, as we all very well may know, tuning into this podcast, that occupancy and many other Revit tasks aren't very easy to do in Revit. Revit doesn't make it very easy for us. So that was actually when I learned Dynamo, I realized that there was this problem with calculating occupancy and how to get all of those values to pass through, whether it's to the tag or to the schedule or just to calculate in general. And so I painstakingly learned Dynamo. And I will say, shout out to Marcelo and all of his practical Dynamo AU courses. Definitely helped me a lot in learning those. And of course, there's so many resources out there for those of you guys who want to learn Dynamo. And I will say, having a problem, having this specific issue at hand definitely helped guide learn Dynamo. It's just, you needed to learn something so focused and so specific, baby step kind of in that workflow. So that really, really helped me.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, actually. I think I brought that up on a couple other episodes. It's when it comes to learning Dynamo or any of these things, even in Revit in general, having that problem to solve, that goal to reach, always helps, because otherwise you're probably gonna back out because it's a daunting task to solve some of these problems. But forcing yourself to get to them is huge, right?
Absolutely. And like I said, even if you just Google it, there's so many resources out there with the Dynamo forum and other sites that you can really do. You start to just find a path to start going down. Maybe not find all the answers, but at least try to find the next steps.
Awesome.
And then I actually went over to Smith Group and, started to integrate this process. And being that Smith Group is, international firm, it was, very, very different in the way that I had to approach this. So, very interested in.
We were talking before.
That's
That's when you learned that your whole process had to be not flipped upside down, but there was a little kink in it as not everyone uses the local DC or the national, whatever DC was using at the time, building code. Which probably, I'm assuming, was probably the IBC with maybe some additional stuff in DC, most likely. Is that kind of how they're set up?
Exactly.
Yeah. So then you go.
Might be like some slight modifications,
but But usually it's usually a major code with some modifications. So that taught you now. Oh crap! I got to go outside of my bubble, and now it forces you to learn more, right? I would assume that's probably what happened.
Exactly. Well, and of course, I'm sure all of us tuning in have seen the architect's spreadsheet with all the formulas built in, and you have to integrate all, export all your areas and all your square footages and figure all of this out in Excel and then pump it back in, whether it's through a dummy schedule or through a sticky or whatever it is. So I really wanted, it was a really big goal of mine to integrate this all in Revit and have it very seamless, whether it's a change has happened or we need to change a occupancy factor or whatever it is.
Awesome.
So
very cool. I had a quick question actually. Working with HOK and DC, I know they do quite a few cool projects. What was the best or your favorite project working there with them?
Oh, that's hard. So I only took a summer internship there,
okay.
And it was like 12 years ago. I'm aging myself here. So I can't say that I can recall too many of the projects that I worked on, but yeah, they do fantastic work. Yeah. They did the National Stadium that I kind of worked on a little bit. I was in interiors, so I didn't get too much of the base building stuff, but they do fantastic work.
That's awesome.
In DC and elsewhere, of course.
Great. All right. So before we jump into the content, again, I want to remind everyone we are live. I see we got some folks already chatting. Aaron's here from Parallax. What's up, Aaron? Aaron's always joining us
Aaron.
For the party. Tom, Reggie, Rick, welcome guys. Feel free to ask questions along the way. I'm going to let Dana jump into just explaining her process and going through it, and I'm sure it's going to lead to whether it's me having questions or whether it's you guys out there having questions. So without any further ado, let's just jump into it.
Awesome. So before I jump in, I do want to kind of preface with, in the handout, which we're going to post up on the BIM After Dark site, is the Autodesk University handout. And this, of course, is on the Autodesk University website as well. But if you go to the very end, and I literally just clicked the end button to get all the way down to the end there, you'll see that it has some workflow requirements. So you'll see there's some workflow requirements. So to preface, we do need an area scheme called life safety. That's very important. That's where all of our schedules are going to be tied. We'll talk about how to get that in there. By inserting these two schedules here, if it would let me select in Adobe, the LS area schedule and the LS function of space keys, which I have here in Revit, my LS function of space keys and my LS area schedule, which, as many of us probably know, but I'll go over it. We go to insert, we can go insert from file, and we can actually insert those two schedules into our project. So if you are trying to integrate this workflow into your project, we're going to send out this Revit sample file, right? We're all so familiar with, and it has these two schedules in it.
Yeah. So after this, Dana's going to send me the files, and I'll post them on the blog, as well as I'll have links here on YouTube in the description. So don't worry about that. You will have access to those. So thanks for that,
You
Dana.
got it. Absolutely. One other thing is we do have 2 Dynamo scripts that I'm going to review today. It's very, very crucial for the workflow that we'll distribute. And one little caveat is that one of them requires the Archilab Bumblebee package. So in order to get the Dynamo to run, you will need that installed. You can go through the package manager in Dynamo, install Bumblebee. You should be good to go to run these 2. In addition, and I have all of these files here for you guys. In addition, we have an Excel file that the function of space Dynamo script pulls from, which we'll go over later, in addition to the tag, which of course has that calculation all integrated into it, right? So those are kind of the key pieces that I'm going to be going over in detail as we go through. But in order to get that to work within your project, you will need that. Awesome. So as you can see, I've already went ahead and I've inserted these 2 schedules in. And by doing that, it actually also brings in my life safety area scheme. So if you actually bring in a schedule into your project tied to that scheme, it will automatically bring in your scheme. So with that being said, when you create your area plan, you're going to want to make sure that you're tying to the life safety type. That's what our schedules are looking at, right? And with that being said, I already have this view created. I already have some boundaries, and I already have my areas placed. There are some automation tools that you can do that. In my Autodesk University course, I did go over a Dynamo script to essentially create area boundaries and areas from your rooms. The there's a kind of a long story behind why we don't use rooms for area calculations, but essentially, as many of us have had to deal with occupant calculations, the area boundaries are actually, it's very particular where those fall, what's included, etc. And it's very hard to manipulate those boundaries with room calculations. So
I was just gonna say, I don't think I've ever seen an area plan where you didn't have to manually create some of those regions no matter what, right? I mean, that's just the nature of it, right?
So the idea behind the automation tool that will create the area boundaries in the areas is basically a starting point,
right?
Right. We know that you're going to have to go ahead and align those area boundaries to different boundaries, whether it's to the interior face of the wall or exterior face center, whatever it might be. But it gives you a starting point. So you don't have to manually draft all of those yourself, right? Which we know can all be a very daunting process.
Yep.
But with that being said, I already have all of those here, which means, of course, that my LS area schedule is populated, right? So I have quite a few areas in here from my first floor plan, right? Awesome. So with this being set up, now essentially what I need to do is I need to, based off of the code, whether it's the NFPA or IBC code, we need to have functions of space. And function of space essentially allocates a occupancy load factor. So like Jeffrey and I were mentioning, his firm was in Connecticut. He was only doing work in Connecticut. I was only in DC, only doing work in DC. So we only had one table. So this next step could potentially be skipped if you're not working with a variation of code versions and years, or other type of jurisdictional regulations. You could just have this preloaded into your template with all of the key values and all of the assigned factors, if you will. However, you'll see, being that we do work nationally, we're going to need to interface with a bunch of different codes. So once again, there's these two scripts. The first one is that I'm going to run here is the LS setup function of space key. I will caveat with saying I really do like Dynamo Player. I know that there's a lot of stipulation on, bringing in data shapes and having other type of input values and pop-ups and different things like that. At Smith Group, I've really tried to get my users comfortable to one interface. So, if I'm integrating data shapes in some, but not in others, and things like that, it starts to become a little bit more complicated. Mm-hmm. So maybe, Jeffrey, we can have another BIM After Dark on how we can maybe best utilize Dynamo Player to get what I call Dynamo for the masses.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, every time we talk about Dynamo, that's always a question, is deployment and usage beyond the Dynamo users, right? So it's cool to see that you at least for these couple of steps, you have a working success story on a use of the player, which is great.
Well, and actually, I only currently have it loaded to these two scripts, but at Smith Group, we have a library of over 70 Dynamo Player scripts. And all of them are native to Dynamo Player, can be run through Dynamo Player, have inputs, outputs, etc., that make it really easier for each, really easy for each user to run from script to script, right? It's not going to be drastically different from each script. So
yeah, that's awesome. And actually, Rachel in the chat just said, I think you answered it for her, but she said, do I need to know Dynamo to do this? And then I think what we're saying is that in theory, no, you don't. As long as you have the scripts and they're running correctly and you walk through that process, then yes, you don't necessarily need to know Dynamo to do this.
That's exactly it. And so essentially, Dynamo Player is what I like to refer to as Dynamo for the masses, right? We can essentially, as Dynamo creators, right? Not everybody, but people who actually create the Dynamo scripts can modify the script so that essentially when you click this little edit inputs button right here, it will actually come up with an interface that you, the user, a non-Dynamo user, can then manipulate the inputs, run the script, and have it run based off of how you need it to interface with your project. Perfect. So once this loads up, you'll see that we have a few different inputs here. And once again, this is actually tying to this Excel spreadsheet. So essentially what it's saying is, what code type are you using? Are you using IBC or NFPA 101? I've put in here NFPA 101. And then which year are you using? And I'm going to use 2015. You could, of course, change that. And then if for whatever reason your Excel spreadsheet changed, you could browse to where that Excel spreadsheet lives. Now, to give you a little bit of an idea of what this Excel spreadsheet looks like, is essentially just a bunch of different tabs with the different code versions. Now at Smith Group, you'll see, especially when we get into the NFPA, we have a little bit of a mixed bag because of the way that we utilize these codes. So, definitely keep that in mind, that based off of, maybe you're working with a county that has some modified code versions, right? And you want to be able to integrate that as a sheet within Excel. You could easily do that. So essentially, within Dynamo, I'm basically just saying, look for the code version, and then pull that sheet name from those inputs. So once I do that, if I get back to Dynamo Player here, and of course, then specify the key schedule. This is the key schedule, LS function of space keys, right? So I don't need to change that. And I'll hit play. Essentially what it's going to do is it's going to read that sheet and pull in all of those values from Excel. This does require the Archilab Bumblebee package to do this smoothly. And of course, it's not working.
Of course, come on.
You gotta love that. I literally just ran this a second ago. Oh, it's because the Excel's open. I'm getting in my way here. I'm getting in my way.
Sorry, it's a live show.
You gotta love a live right? Demo. Exactly. So you can see here that once I do that, I get all of the function of space keys tied to that specific code and code version.
Right. And so what I think what you were saying too before, for anyone who may have been intimidated by that whole Dynamo part in the import, if this table essentially doesn't change for you very often, in theory you could have this table set up in your template in your project and you don't even have to think about it, right? But what you're allowing now is for, if you need to flip codes, if you need to change codes, if you need to pull in different information, you have now an automation that will allow you to pull it in. But I just wanted people to know that, because I think anyone who may not be comfortable at all in any of these environments may be looking at that like, well, can't do it. The reality is, if you have this table in your project template, or even copy it in from another project, right, in general, then you don't even need to run through this. So anyone who might have been intimidated by that, don't be scared. But now you know that there is also a way to automatically bring in updated, refreshed, different code data is essentially what.
And this could be thought of for really any key schedule, right? I love key schedules. I think key schedules are definitely underutilized in Revit, like many other things. A lot of the time we think about them for room style, because that's like the default key schedule, right? When you want to associate your finishes to all of your different rooms and have groupings of finishes. Maybe you have back of the house finishes. Another really popular one is for door hardware.
Doors, perfect
right?
One,
You have, you want to, I'm definitely going to share the Excel file. All of the information is going to be provided that I'm going through. So absolutely. I have this little file folder here that I'm going to share with the BIM After Dark group.
Yep.
So
John, you may have missed. Yeah, John may have missed the beginning. So we will. There's a file of sample files that Dana's offered to share, and so I'll have a download link in the description here on YouTube, but also at the RevitKid.com. So no worries there.
And if you're really anxious to get the information, it is up on the Autodesk University website. So you can get to that as well. And there is, in the handout, there's a Google Drive link that has all the data sets, all the Dynamo scripts, the Excel file, everything in there. So the Autodesk University site is also a hub for all this information as well.
Yep.
So.
As we mentioned, this is an adaptation on Dana's course. So I'll post a link right now in the chat, and that'll also be available as well. But I think I just posted the link now for people who just can't wait.
Yeah. So Christopher Hernandez just said, please get us shared parameters for key schedules. That is actually on the roadmap. So hopefully we can see that sooner than later. I don't know exactly what that means when they say it's on the roadmap, whether that's like, going to be a 2021.3,
where on the roadmap is it? Yeah.
Or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
But yes, absolutely. So the next process that we work into, as Chris is pointing out, is essentially that hiccup in Revit. So we'll get to that. But pointing out basically what Jeffrey was pointing out before is, at the previous architecture firm that I was at, where we only worked in DC, I didn't have to run this script, right? The LS setup function of space key, I just had this in my template, right? So really the only script that I needed to run was this LX copy occupant load factor. Okay, and LS, of course, is life safety. If any of you were wondering.
Stating the obvious, but you got to do it sometimes.
Exactly. Okay, so now that I have not only my areas, but I also have my key schedule populated with all of my key functions, whether that's in your template or whether you've loaded it in through Dynamo, now we can go through and we can associate the function of space, right? If I can find the function of space, with each area, right? So I'm just going to go through here and make some really quick associations so that we can have some of these populated. And of course, as you can see, as I populate these, they're going to populate within the area schedule, right? So that area that I just populated now has assembly use, but not only assembly use, it also has the values that came with the key schedule, right? So I also have the code source. So it came from NFPA 101, table 7.3.1. It's an occupant load factor of 7. And it's net square footage. And of course, this is more of an informational parameter so that my architect or fire protection engineer knows how to calculate the area within that space, whether it's net or gross. So as I go through, and I can show you here as well in the schedule, as I select and specify a function of space, really just doing this kind of randomly, as you can see here, it's going to automatically associate some key values with it. Any of those key values that were associated in my function of space. So anything that is associated to this function of space, i.e. B through D in this column, is going to automatically be associated to that area as well. And that's really the beauty of a key schedule, is it allows a grouping of parameters to be assigned to one element, whether that's a door, a room, or in this case, an area. So just quickly going through here, running through. Jeffrey, let me know if we're getting any questions.
Reggie just asked, do we have to create any parameters to do this?
Very, very good question. So when you copy in my schedule, as I mentioned before, so the very first thing that you should do when you're wanting to recreate this workflow in your Revit model is you're going to go to insert from file. And of course they moved this in 2021. I think it's over on the far right. So I'm constantly fumbling for it now. Insert views from file, and then you'll insert in these two schedules from the data set that we provide you. When you do that, when you actually bring in these two schedules, not only will you get the life safety area scheme, you'll get all of the parameters. And they'll actually be shared parameters. They'll just load into that. You can
that mystery shared
export
file.
them. Exactly. You can export them to your shared parameter file, and then they'll be in that exported category, what have you. You don't really have to worry about that for this to work too much.
That's awesome.
But just once again, when you bring in those two schedules, you'll automatically get all of those parameters.
Yeah, that's a great question, Reggie. And yeah, so do you know, I actually haven't tested this and thinking off the top of my head, because I believe you can copy paste schedules when the two files are open, I think, between projects. I may have to double check that, but I was wondering if insert from view is what's going to do it correctly or not. I don't know, just thinking out loud. Also, Asan is here from last week. What's up, Asan? And Marcelo also joined us too. I know you called him out earlier. He might have missed it, but Marcelo is here.
Marcelo is giving you love for your practical Dynamo sessions. So
yeah,
definitely
you got a shout out
out
before you even showed up, Marcelo. Awesome.
All right. So now I have gone through, and that's probably the most tedious process, right? As you, the user, having to sign, and which is a very important process, right? It's something that you as the user need to do. I can't automate that. There might be some associations we could make if you named your areas really precisely, but still you would have to name your areas precisely. So it does take some work in getting your function of space assigned to that area, right? Is it an assembly space? Is it an unoccupied space? We've actually given that a category as well. So that, if you have an area within your space, your stairs or your corridors or your bathrooms or whatever, you can say it's unoccupied. So it will be a 0 occupant factor. And then of course I'm going to get into later, and I assigned one here for fixed seating. So there is a fixed seating category, and that does break the calculation a little bit for our code, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. Essentially, when you have fixed seats, your occupancy is the amount of fixed seats you have. So if you have an auditorium with 100 fixed seats, you have an occupancy of 100.
Right.
So it's not based off of the area
not much math
at all
going on there, other than pointing and clicking.
They made one thing easy for us.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. Okay. So now the hard part, and this is what was brought up before on getting those shared parameters, right, as key values as shared parameters, and being able to use those key values in calculations. Because unfortunately we cannot do that right now. It's a limitation of Revit. And so this is when I got to this workflow back, a while ago, we'll say. And I said, oh my gosh, Revit can't do this. And I did some research and I was like, oh, what is this program called Dynamo? Apparently I can do this in Dynamo. So I guess I got to learn this program. And once again, with a lot of help from the community, was able to do that. So, well, this factor right here, essentially, for those of us who aren't extremely familiar or maybe forgotten how to calculate occupancy, is it's the area. So let's just say for this space here, my area for this assembly space has an area of 3,500 square feet. Well, I'm going to take that and divide it by the occupant load factor, which is 100. To get my occupant load. Now, unfortunately, in Revit, I can't use this value, this occupant load factor value, in a calculation in Revit because it's a key value. So what essentially I'm going to do is I'm going to push this value to this light blue E column. And then that essentially will be the parameter that will be used in the calculation. So cross our fingers, it might be on the roadmap. Maybe this Dynamo script will no longer be necessary in a few versions of Revit. We will see. But in the meantime, all we have to do is literally go to our LS, copy occupant load factor script, and hit play. And what you're going to do is you're going to see really quickly, it's like a flash, is all of these values from D get copied over to E.
Except
and now if I minimize.
And your fix is that what threw an error in Dynamo
my
too?
Fix. Look at you picking it up. I love it.
I had to.
So you'll see here that now all of my occupant loads in column H have now been calculated, right? I have 36 people that can occupy that assembly space with 3,500 square feet. Now, as Jeff pointed out, I do have this fixed space. And as we mentioned, fixed spaces essentially is the amount of fixed seats that you have, is the amount of occupancy you can have in that space. So what I've done is, because we have this, basically this reporting parameter, the net gross fixed, which not only tells my architect or fire protection engineer how to calculate the area within that space, right? Like, are you calculating fixed furniture or columns or shafts or all of those wonderful things that we need to look at in terms of the code and how to calculate area. But we also have this fixed parameter. So essentially, when I do that copy script, when I run that copy occupant load factor script, what it does is it says, if this is fixed, then check this box, column I, LS fixed occupant load. And so when I do that, it becomes checked. And then because of the conditional formatting, right, in Revit, basically says, if this box is checked, then make this box red if it's 0, which basically tells the user, you need to input how many fixed seats you have here, right? So I'm going to assume I have 100 fixed seats like we've been talking about. Type in my 100.
I'm sorry, I'm laughing because it's a 200 square foot room. It's cracking me up.
We're going to have a lot of tight people, no socially distancing in that space. And then you'll see that we have our 100 people or 100 occupants now pushed over to our column H for occupant load.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So really it's the one script, that copy occupant load Dynamo script. When I press play there, you'll see that it not only is going to push all those values from D to E
Mm-hmm.
and then calculate my occupant load, but it's also going to look for any fixed
Mm-hmm.
factors and then check that box.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one of the questions, or I guess comments that I had from my fire protection engineers at Smith Group was, there are times where they speak to the county or the jurisdiction and they say, do you know what, for that giant auditorium, you can have less occupants or more occupants, and they might, fudge the number a little bit,
Right.
with permission, right? I mean, they're not going to go in there and fudge the numbers by themselves, hopefully, right?
Right.
So in that case, the user can simply come in here and say, rather than the 36 occupants that I have here, I'm going to go ahead and check that box and make it 40. Nice. And now it says you've overridden that value, right? Awesome. It is overridden. It's not fixed, but it's overridden. And with some conditional formatting, we can easily show the user that that value has been overridden from the calculation.
Awesome. Now, so now the occupant load calc, so the occupant load column, are you running those calculations in the schedule, or are you running those through Dynamo and pushing them to the schedule?
In the schedule. So if we look at the fields here and I go to occupant load, you'll see that it is a calculation. And I'm going to comment that in the chat there so you guys can all see it, because I know it's kind of small on Revit. But essentially it's saying, if it's a fixed occupant load, be the fixed occupant load override, right? So if this box is checked, then be this value that the user has specified, right? Whether that's fixed seats or, the conversation they had with the jurisdiction. Otherwise, if this is not checked, divide area by the occupant load factor. And then round up at the end, right? Because we can't have 32.2 occupants, can't have 0.2 of a person. So we round that up.
When I was going through this similar process, that roundup function was something that there was probably 3 project architects that we had to sort of get on board with how the rounding was working, especially when it comes to if you move over to toilet calculations, right? I guess with rooms it's a little different because rounding up is simple, but with toilets, like, well, sometimes I actually want to round down. I'm like, oh boy, and then like they have their fun architect math that just cracked me up, because I remember I was like, oh, round up, this is perfect, and like 3 people questioned, what is that actually doing?
Absolutely. Okay, so I'm getting some questions about changes. So essentially, there's a few different ways that we could have changes. As Martine pointed out, the factors could change. Maybe, oh my goodness, I realized that I put in 2015 code when I should have put in the 2018 code, and the only difference is this value right here, because that's pretty common, and you can manually change that, right? So let me actually make sure that I pick one that I'm using, like commercial kitchens. It's fine. So let's just say that becomes 200 instead of 100. And I go back to my area schedule. You'll see these values do not match anymore. And this would be a wonderful time, Martine, to maybe build in some conditional formatting that says, hey, your values don't match. Like if this value, what have you. That might be a little bit of a tricky with conditional formatting, just because Revit isn't that great with conditional formatting.
You may have to have like a column that just says and it's only used for that.
Exactly.
Right?
Like it does not equal exactly. So you could have like a no column or what have you.
Yep.
So then at this point, you would simply rerun the copy occupant load factors, and you'll see now the value has been updated to 200. So at that point, when somebody says, hey, I need to update the occupant loads key schedule, right? They should be cognizant to know that they need to rerun the copy script to ensure that all of those values have been copied over, right? The other change would be is if, for whatever reason, it happens quite a lot, maybe you didn't calculate the area right, you included some fixed furniture or what have you, and you shouldn't have, or you need to move some boundary lines. So naturally your area, your square footage is going to change, right? So if I go back to my schedule here and let's just say, make this area much bigger, right? So that my area is larger, it's automatically going to update, right? Because this is a formula. I'm not pushing that with Dynamo. The formula itself within this field for occupant load is specifically looking at the area. So if the area updates, the occupant load will automatically update. So that's one thing that as your architects or what have you are manipulating the floor plan, which happens quite a bit, or you need to manipulate those area boundary lines for whatever reason. As long as your area boundary lines are in the right place in calculating the accurate area, your occupant load will reflect that area. The last one would be, I know there's another one, another change that we would have, is if your occupant load changed, right? Like not just necessarily the value, but let's just say that I, wanted to change this from, whatever this is, this concentrated to unconcentrated, right? At that point, once again, I would need to rerun the script to copy over those values, and all of my occupant load values would update. Now, in terms of the tag, this tag is looking at the formula as well, right? So if I go to this label, this occupant load is actually looking at the same exact formula. So it's also going to update when you copy your occupant load factors over or your square footage changes for whatever reason. So it's the same exact formula between the schedule and the tag itself.
Awesome. Oh, so you're not actually pushing, you're using the formula in each. Interesting. Cool.
Exactly. Which once again, we will provide.
Yeah. It comes when you exactly with the simple files. A couple people which I knew was going to happen, are asking about plumbing fixture counts and if you factored any of this into that. And so I guess I'd like to hear if you have any thoughts on, because I'm assuming when you were going through this process, that was the question as well that was asked of you, right?
Definitely. So I actually started my own Dynamo package. I didn't share it, but it's called Dynamo.
Dynamo, nice.
And it actually it's specifically for plumbing calculations.
Awesome.
However, it's really cumbersome, as I'm sure you guys can imagine, with graduated values, right? Like one fixture for the first 100 occupants, and then like those types of things. At Smith Group, we've actually created something really, really clever, and this actually could be probably like its own separate podcast. But essentially, we push these values by level into a generic annotation family. And within the generic annotation family, we have all of the different plumbing classifications. And the plumbing classifications have all of the formulas built into them in the generic annotation. So when we push the occupant factors or the occupant loads to the generic annotation, it magically does all the calculations for us within the generic annotation family. So I'm using Dynamo to place those generic annotations on the sheet, because that's essentially, it's like a little table,
right,
that shows all of the different plumbing fixtures and how many you need per level, per classification. And then, not only am I creating those on the sheet, but I'm also pushing the occupant load factors to them. So
now, did you use generic annotation because the end goal was that table on the sheet, or was that the easiest area to explore and do that.
So I'll actually admit I got to Smith Group and that generic annotation existed already. So I was super lucky. And I can't even tell you who made that. It's probably funny. Someone from my team that's left.
Maybe someone out there is watching and they're like, it was me.
They're like, oh, that's my family.
If you're out there, thanks.
So yes, but the generic annotation is amazing. And that's exactly it. It's specifically for the graphics on the sheet to demonstrate all of those plumbing fixture requirements. And, so you can essentially switch the type of generic annotation and it will alter which classification and come with all of the different formulas with it. So essentially I just push the occupants based off of this workflow to that generic annotation and it does the math for me. Really clever. I would actually like to know who created that generic annotation so I can give them a pat on the back and thank them for lessening the amount of work I had to do.
No, that's great. And I think I'm sure if you search out there's probably plenty of examples. But for those of you maybe not familiar with why we're saying the complications of plumbing calcs is what Dana was saying is it's not just a simple division. There's depending on the code, it may be you need this certain number of toilets until you hit 100 people, and then from there on it's per number of people. And so the calculations that formula that Dana posted for the occupant load now is infinitely longer because there's a lot more factors that come into play.
And so it varies for men and women.
Right. Yep. Men and women, handicap versus unisex. I mean, it's depending on the code, right? And so there's a ton of factors, but the reality is the process that you're talking about, the process you set up can be the same. It's just that formula piece of it is the part that becomes much more complicated. And once you get to the number of people, I mean, that's getting you to the starting point of doing plumbing calcs, right? In theory. So I think it all ties together.
Now, one thing that I have heard quite a bit, and I probably shouldn't bring this up and put a worm into my own can here, but is when if I go back to the schedule here, it's essentially going to be rounding up per area and then calculate, so if you have let's just simplify this for a second. If I have 3 spaces that are assembly and I have, 12.8 occupants, that's going to be rounded up to 13, right? Or let's just even say 12.2 occupants because it's lesser. It's 12.2 occupants. Now I have 13 across 3 spaces. I'm probably going to have an extra occupant.
Yep.
Right? For the level itself. So I have seen or had questions about that itself.
Right.
There are some workarounds, and I know we have a few minutes, so I'll just pull this up without going into too much detail on it because it's kind of crazy. And I found this workflow online, so I can't take credit for it. I will try to find out where I found this site and post it up in the comments. But essentially, this is incorporating a few additional parameters in here to where you get a result of the percentage,
right? And
then utilizing the percentage in your formula as well. So it becomes, like a part of the formula in that you're looking at kind of all of the areas on the level as a whole as a percentage to get a much more accurate occupant load.
And that would be like we're talking about with toilet fixtures, you may want a more accurate count because 2 more people could dramatically impact the amount of fixtures. And if adding a fixture doesn't seem like a big deal, but it could be a very big deal, right? And so that's the exact conversation I had with our project architects when we first shown this about rounding up, because then they're like, well, you're rounding up and now I've got 3 extra people in the whole building, and now I've got an extra toilet. Like, I don't want that extra toilet kind of thing. So That's a great point.
So there are additional workarounds to that. But what I usually will say is that this is a conservative. You're never going to be under on your count, right? So you might be over by an occupant or so. If you get to the realization that you're having to make serious changes, I never would want to go to a project architect and say they need another stall in the core. That would definitely not be a conversation I would want to have. then we can start to look at maybe an additional schedule that looks at those factors a little bit more refined, or just not rounded at all. Right? So that you can look at them aggregated across the level, right? So if I actually just come in here and look at the fields and take out that little round up bit, right, now we can look at exactly, and of course I'm probably formatting it to be rounded as well. I've probably got like the double.
There's no getting rid of your rounding now.
0 decimal places. Exactly. So now we can start to see exactly what those occupants would be. And of course, this isn't what we would submit for code, but this gives us a better example behind the scenes of what those actual numbers are without being rounded.
Right, exactly. Because let's be honest, we're going to round them even more when we submit it to the code officials, right?
Exactly.
Oh, that's awesome. I was just checking some content, some comments on here. Everyone likes Dynamo, by the way. I do.
Dynamo. I'll see if I can do more with that. Asan promised to teach me Python, so maybe I'll have more to add to my Dynamo package.
Awesome. And then Craig mentioned a couple resources. Some folks asked about learning Dynamo, and you mentioned Marcelo's classes on AU, so look those up. And then Craig, thanks for mentioning it. I do have a class called DIY Dynamo, so you can check that out. Just go to DIYDynamo.com. Not to mention, there's just tons of great resources on Dynamo. So check out just dynamobim.org. Check out all the forum stuff. I mean, but the biggest thing, and actually I have an episode if you search on my channel for 3 steps to starting in Dynamo. And I kind of talk about that idea of finding a problem to solve and then working towards it. And so that's exactly what Dana was saying here. And I think that's what you guys should do if you're interested in it. Cool. So anything else you wanted to mention before we wrapped up? This is phenomenal.
Not too much. Like I did say, there are a few additional workflows that you could incorporate to make this a little bit speedier, like the automatic generation of your area boundaries and areas, so that you don't have to do that manually. Working through that. Within that script, it also allows you, if you have a separate LinkedIn model for your life safety calculations from your architectural model, you can actually use a link to pull the rooms.
I'm surprised we didn't get that question, to be honest with you. I'm a little surprised.
Yeah, I'm surprised also.
Actually, that brings me back to a question I think we might have glanced over from way back in the beginning. Somebody asked, and I think you answered it, but let's just reiterate it. When you're bringing in the schedules, let's say you're bringing this information into a project, you're bringing in the schedules, you still are creating that area plan. You're not bringing in an area plan, right? I believe you have to create the area plan. You can.
I don't think that you can bring in 3D views, but let's do it since we have a few minutes here. So if let's just open up, I guess, the sample, out of the box sample, because I've manipulated this.
By the way, there's some new ones in there, and I don't know if you've noticed.
Yeah, like what is this crazy
list?
Did
you see the house thing? There's this little teeny house that's like half completed in there in 20. I don't know if it's 21 or 20, but I was clicking through it.
This guy?
Yeah, where did that come from?
All right, let's open it.
it's like a.
We will do occupancy in there.
It's like a half completed suburb house that look at this thing. Like what? Where did this even come from?
So John, yes, you would actually, it would basically be a refined schedule like this, right? Like maybe you would duplicate this schedule based off of how it is that you need to visualize this data, and then remove some columns, hide some columns, whatever, and then throw this on your general sheet. Exactly. Yep. Along with, you could throw color fills onto your life safety area plans so that, all of your assembly spaces are a certain hatch and all that good stuff. Exactly.
And what's awesome, going back to what you were talking about with changes, if the shape of the building changes, as long as those factors are not changing, in theory, that schedule's up to date, right? The only thing that you would have to rerun the Dynamo script for would be if you're changing things like the occupancy stuff. So that's pretty cool when you think about it. As long as you keep those in place and you're not changing those values, that is going to be an up-to-date schedule, which is, that's BIM, right? That's what you want.
That was the craziest part. Right. It's so amazing that all these architects had these, really clever ways of calculating occupancy. But when it came to a change,
yes,
it was like a whole 2 days of integrating. Are they right? Are the numbers right? Did I transpose them correctly?
Yep.
All of that. So
for sure.
All right. So we're in our little house. This is cute.
It shocks me this project season.
I know. So we only have 3 schedules here, and I'm guessing if I go to the room and area computations, not in a 3D view. It really frustrates me that you can't do certain things in a
crazy.
Yeah. So if I go to room and area computations, you'll see that I only have gross building and rentable. So I don't even have life safety yet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to insert from file, insert views from file, and click on that project that we're going to send you guys called occupancy schedules. If I can find that guy under Room After Dark. And I'm going to bring in my LS area schedule and my LS function of space schedule, just those 2. And you'll see it brings in all the parameters for me. And now when I go up to view, or I guess I'll just go to architecture and create a new area plan, now I have life safety as an option. So it not only brought in the schedules with all the parameters, but it also brought in the area scheme as well.
Right.
So now at this point,
you can't bring in the actual area plan because it's not the same thing. It's 3D objects, right?
Exactly. So yeah, you can't import or you can't transfer 3D views across projects, right?
Right.
But yes, I could simply come in and I could create a plan view looking at not a floor plan, but an area plan, right? Let's look at the first floor plan of this house. I will always say no to this.
I was just going to ask you that. Because I'm sure people is thinking the same thing. Do you say yes to this or do you say no?
I say no. It seems like those lines kind of want to stick where they get created.
Yeah, they're hosted as somehow, some weird fancy way, right?
Yeah, Revit has its own rules for calculating area, which is kind of awesome, I guess. But for life safety, we definitely don't want to use that. It's like, thanks, Autodesk, but no.
Right, exactly.
So now when I come in here and I draw or place my areas, right, draw in my area boundary lines and place in my areas, they'll automatically get generated within that schedule, right? Because that schedule, as we know, is looking at this specific area scheme, right? So now at this point, all you need is the tag, just the tag with the formula in it.
That's perfect. Rick asked, and I think he answered his own question, but how do you get the colors in the schedule? Is that conditional formatting? So all the colors you're seeing here in this schedule.
So the colors here, I actually did specifically for my course. The yellow ones are user inputs. The gray ones are key values. The light blue are coming from Dynamo, and the dark blue is a formula. And all I did here was just add shading.
Oh, okay. But I guess in theory, you could do conditional formatting. But yeah, so you're shading the column itself, which is pretty neat. I mean, column. It's helpful for seeing everything. So.
No, for the conditional formulas or formatting that I did to get, some of these things here, like if I put this back to 0, for example, if I go back into formatting and look at my LS fixed occupant load override and I go to conditional format, you'll see it says if my occupant load is yes, right, my fixed occupant load is checked and it has an override of 0, it will be red.
Right. So the reality is, I guess he's semi-right. Initially, you colored them just using shading, but then the overrides are being done by conditional formatting. So great question.
Precisely. Lots of colors going on.
Yeah. Awesome.
It's hard to demonstrate schedules, right? It's like you gotta have something going on with them.
It is. Fantastic. Oh, so cool. So let me before we wrap up, let me try now, because I think this will be helpful for people to using, because this is really the first time. I mean, I read through the AU handout and I kind of skimmed through it, so I had an idea of it, but this is kind of the first time I've seen you demo it. So let me try and sort of repeat the process, and then you say if I'm right or wrong, and I think it'll help people who are also watching it see what's going on. So what you're doing here is you're giving us a schedule, the 2 schedules. You're giving a sample file of the schedule, so you can start there. Let's say you are the one who sets up templates. In theory, you could have these already in your template, right? In your project. So you'd have the 2 key schedules. So 2 processes, but the intro is kind of the same. So if I have a project that I already started, I bring in the schedules. So then I have these key schedules. Now I need to load in my IBC or an NFP or whatever code information we're using. All of that is set up in an Excel sheet. If you needed to add new codes, you would just put it in the Excel sheet in the format that you already have set up, right? So if you added a new code, you could just make a tab, call it what you needed, do your thing, and then you're using Dynamo to pull that in. If you don't want to use Dynamo, you can just manually input that data one time in that schedule in your template, and it's always there, right? Then you go through now, you're setting up, after you set up your area plans, I should have said that first. You have to set up your area plans. You go through and you assign, because now the information's there, you're assigning your keys, which are essentially your space occupant categories. I forgot what exact term IBC uses, but your categories of occupancy, so to speak, to the spaces. Now you're going to the schedule we're looking at here. I'll pull it up on screen again. The schedule we're looking at here, and you can double check it. You see what table it's in. You see the factors that you're using. Then the last piece of the puzzle is now you're running Dynamo to push this stupid number into one other parameter because Revit can't do it from there, and then the rest of it's being done for you, right? And now you have your calculations. Does that wrap it up in a bow?
You got it.
Sweet.
You got it. And
the reason I do that is I think it's helpful.
Also has the formula.
Yes, and and then it's also being pushed to the tag because the tag is using the formula. And so that's actually a great point, because I do think one of the biggest challenges people run into in this workflow is, well, great, now I have a calculated value. I can't, well, I guess now you can, or you could, you have a limited ability to. Before, you could never push a calculated value into a tag or a shared parameter. Now you can, but what you're doing, which I kind of like, is you have the formula existing in the tag and in the schedule, so then it's automatically updating. Sweet. I wanted to do that because I think it's valuable when we're showing something
100%.
very process oriented to sort of run through it. Like the way my brain works is I'm almost making the flow in my brain graphically, and so I wanted to push that back to people because there was a ton of great information. So thank you for that. Any final words before we wrap this thing up?
That's pretty much it. I definitely was second. For those of you, I see there's a lot of people who would like to learn Dynamo. Definitely check out the community. Come up with a problem. You have a problem, Google it, add Dynamo at the end. I'm sure you're going to find tons of resources, some of them probably from Parallax team. So thanks, guys. And
yes.
Definitely reach out. I mean, the community is just so wonderful.
Great.
Outside of that, it's really just a few things you're going to need, right? The 2 schedules, the tag, the 2 Dynamo scripts, and the Excel spreadsheet to go with it.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Perfect.
So once you have all of that, you're good to go.
Awesome. And all of that will be available to you guys in the description below and on the blog when I post it probably tomorrow morning. One final question that I actually think is a pretty good question from Rick is, when or if Revit allows us to use those shared parameters from the key schedules and all that stuff, then the second Dynamo script won't be necessary, right?
If that also allows them to be used in calculations.
There we go. In formulas or calculations, correct, right? So there's the 2 pieces of it. It's not just the pushing and shared, but there's also using them in a formula. And so if that happens, then yeah, because the reality is all Dynamo is doing is shifting that from this unusable parameter area to a usable parameter area.
And also you guys can find me on Twitter at Dana De Filippi.
Yes, and I'll definitely post a link to Dana's Twitter as well. Always great. And don't forget the BIM Thoughts Podcast as well.
BIM Thoughts Podcast. And I also am a moderator for the BIM XT group. It's the East Coast Revit users group. Awesome. We have a monthly meeting every month, of course. And it's varied topics, so definitely check us out as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Dana. This was great. Thank you for taking the time to do this and share this with the audience here. I really, really appreciate it. We'll have to have you come back on and dig deeper. Maybe we'll talk about plumbing calcs next time.
or Dynamo Player.
Dynamo
for
Player,
the
that's right. Or maybe Dynamo. Maybe by then we could
Dynamo.
We'll
Yeah, we might get to have it. We might have a collab with Asan on that one.
There we go. Awesome. Thank you, Dana, so much. Thank you guys for joining us today. Feel free to subscribe to the channel here on YouTube. I'll see everyone next week on Thursday, same time, same place. New guest to be announced very soon. And with that, I bid you all adieu. Thank you again, Dana, and have a lovely evening and weekend, guys. See you later.